kinds of questions. First on the justice and then the health. How much is the on-the-spot fine? What's the maximum fine period of prison if you are prosecuted? And will there be any additional penalties for business? For example, your boss orders you into a small room with a bunch of people. And on the health side, does the Army Volunteers of England, what's the Scottish equivalent of that? NHS Volunteers. Can you tell me more about field hospitals? What premises and new markets, the SEC, something like that? And the numbers that you mentioned of 40-50,000, that's nowhere near the 50% that we were talking a few weeks ago for herd immunity. So are we now at risk of a second wave after this lockdown ends?
Okay, I'll pass over to Catherine on the health questions. On the questions about penalties, where right now you'll understand how quickly we're doing this work. We're just finalising all of the detail around penalties and things like the fine level and potential imprisonment, and that will be published later today once we've finalised that. We're trying to have as consistent a position across the whole of the UK, although these regulations are Scottish Government regulations, and we'll publish that as soon as possible today. I would take the opportunity though to stress that these enforcement measures, I would hope, never have to be used. They're there as a last resort. They're there to underline the seriousness of what we're asking people to do and the importance of very high compliance. But my hope is that people will comply for the right reasons, the health protection reasons, and that the police will not have to use these enforcement measures. But the detail you're asking for will be covered later on. On the question about the volunteers, there are numerous routes, and again we can set this out for people, that people can and are offering their services to the NHS or to community efforts, and in non-NHS senses these will be coordinated by local resilience partnerships. What we're looking at right now is bringing together a central point for people, whatever it is they want to do, whatever their skills are, that they can come to and register their interest. And again, there'll be more information provided on that shortly. On the issues about herd immunity and spread and second wave, I'll hand over to the Chief Medical Officer.
Thank you. We know from modelling that these suppression measures need to be in place for a long time. We've said that repeatedly. We do also know that there will be a spike of cases once we have suppressed and released those measures. Our new COVID-19 Scientific Advisory Group for Scotland is meeting for the first time today, and amongst a list of asks I have of them is to watch what's happening in other countries as those measures are being lifted. So, for example, China has lifted its measures. It took 5 days before they were starting to report new cases again. So we want to follow what's happening across the world so that we can, through that scientific advisory group, provide the bespoke, scientifically based evidence as to what we should be doing in Scotland. You mentioned, I think, field hospitals. I think that those words are used perhaps more loosely than a traditional field hospital that we have all the time. We have our Scottish 205 field hospital always available, and training processes for supporting the armed forces were there to be a reason to be deployed. What we are talking about really is increasing NHS hospital capacity. So we have been in early discussion with our colleagues in the armed forces. That's a UK armed forces would have an offer across the UK, and we are looking as to what we would want and need in Scotland, and also where those sites would be. So we want to have our NHS capacity as maximised as possible, and one possibility is therefore having temporary hospitals to increase that capacity.
I was just wanting to discuss intensive care. Are we on this kind of same trajectory as other parts of the UK in terms of kind of the capacity of our intensive care beds, because it's been rising steeply over the last few days? Where are we in terms of getting that additional capacity? The Cabinet Secretary talked about quadrupling it to 700. So how many do we have ready now? And again, sort of, I guess, following on about extra capacity, are you now in a position to say that you wouldn't rule out using Edinburgh's empty sick kids hospital as an opportunity to create more beds?
Can I just say a couple of words on that, and then I'm going to hand over to the Chief Medical Officer on the issue of where Scotland is in relation to other parts of the UK, and then to the Cabinet Secretary about NHS capacity. gave a number yesterday for those that we know as of the night before that were in intensive care. That number today is 57 in intensive care. We have spare capacity in intensive care right now, but that's being monitored closely, and the work to increase intensive care capacity is ongoing and will continue to be ongoing. Catherine, do you want to maybe address the point of where we are in relation to other parts of the UK, and then Jean can say a bit more about the steps we're taking to maximise capacity, not just in intensive care but across the NHS.
We still remain behind, particularly London, but also behind other parts of England as to the number of cases and that pressure on the NHS, both acute beds and also intensive care beds. We perhaps have put these suppression measures in earlier on that upslope of the curve, and what we hope is therefore that rapid acceleration that we have talked about is perhaps not as rapid as has been seen in other parts of the country. It's not that I'm saying it's not going to be rapid, and these numbers of cases already you're seeing day after day increasing, but perhaps not as rapid, particularly when we've got good compliance with these suppression measures.
So you remember that what we said initially in terms of intensive care beds was that we aim to double the number that we currently have and take that to 380. We are well on track to doing that, but we need to keep a number of those in terms of our calculations for non-COVID patients, because of course emergency and urgent care and maternity care continues in our NHS. So we're on track for that doubling, but we have set ourselves the aim of quadrupling the number, so we would double that again, and that work is underway to look at all the ways by which we might do that, alongside our work on securing additional ventilators and the supply and medical equipment that would be needed to stock up that quadrupling of intensive care beds. On the other measure, which was increasing the capacity inside our NHS, at the moment in terms of beds, not intensive care beds, but beds, we said we would release 3,000 from the existing bed capacity in order to have that set aside for COVID patients, and we have almost secured that. We're a couple of hundred short, but we'll get to that 3,000 very quickly. That has come largely from the other steps we've taken about pausing elective care and so on.
And we're going to leave the news conference there in Scotland. Numbers up by 3 to 25 deaths, unfortunately, and numbers of infections underestimated. We say goodbye now to viewers on BBC World.
But encapsulated other areas.
So a very comprehensive news conference there by the First Minister of Scotland and her